evening, and welcome to Takoma Park, Maryland. We are very happy that you're here for this very special program. I'm Karen McPherson. I'm the Children's and Young Adult Manager for the Takoma Park, Maryland Library. We are the only small city-run library in the state of Maryland. And over the past few years, we have had a wonderful partnership with Politics and Prose Bookstore that has allowed us to bring authors and illustrators to our community, just like this evening. And so I do want to give a shout out to my Politics and Prose colleagues, Mary Alice Garber, Maria Salvador, Donna Wells, Margaret Ordo, and there are others here as well. We work really well together as a team. I did want to also just mention I have a few very brief announcements so everybody knows. There will be a book signing at the end, and I will give you some guidelines when the program is over. So please, I do ask everybody to stay in your seats so we can set up for the book signing, which will be here on the stage. The second announcement is this is Children's Book Week, the 100th anniversary of Children's Book Week. And while this is our premier event this week, we also have two other events. One of them co-sponsored with Politics and Prose. We have a flyer with more details out that way, so please pick one up if you're interested. And let's see, I have one other announcement that I wanted to make. Okay, that was the filming part. Okay, so now I'm done with the announcements. So we can now go ahead and move on to the program. And I actually have the distinct pleasure and privilege of introducing our moderator. Deborah D. Taylor has been a force, and I mean a force in the world of children's and young adult literature for more than 40 years. After receiving her bachelor's degree and then her master's degree in library science from the University of Maryland, Deb took a job at the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, where she worked from 1974 until just late last year. And over the year, when she retired, so yes, yeah, hear, hear. This is a special lady, I'm telling you. Over the years, Deb has served on or chaired innumerable book award committees, including the Coretta Scott King Book Awards. She has served as president of the Young Adult Library Services Association, which is YALSA, the teen division of the American Library Association, and has taught young adult literature at the University of Maryland. I was one of her students at one point, and I can attest that she is one of the best teachers I've ever had, no doubt about it. So, Deb served as chair of the 40th Coretta Scott King Anniversary Celebration. And in 2015, she received the Coretta Scott King Virginia Hamilton Award for Lifetime Achievement. Please give a warm welcome to a very special person, Deb Taylor. All right.
And also. This is a very special night, and I hope everybody is being so quiet and so attentive, and we're really happy about that. But we want to see this as a celebration because this is something very special and very sort of unusual to be able to talk to two people who have been both at the beginning of something and at the current the current level of a particular recognition of outstanding works. So to be able to introduce you to Eloise Greenfield, I'm sure that most of you know her work, and that she was born in North Carolina and she has been a DC resident for a very long time.
Almost 90 years.
Almost 90 years. And she discovered a love of reading and writing and realized there were few books that showed the fullness of African American life. She published her first book in 1972.
Yes.
And went on to write and publish more than 45 books and counting, because there are new books coming, and that is really remarkable. From Honey I Love, that I'm sure many of you know, yes, to The Great Migration, this multiple award-winning author has captivated audiences through the years, and she has had a great influence on the next crop of young writers like Jason Reynolds, whose website says he's crazy about stories. He is a New York Times best-selling author, a National Book Award honoree, a Kirkus Award winner, Walter Dean Myers Award winner, NAACP Image Award winner, and winner, of course, of multiple Coretta Scott King honors. His debut novel, yes, was When I Was the Greatest, which was, the Coretta Scott King Book Awards has an award for new talent. And it's called the John Steptoe Award, named after a children's book writer and illustrator, John Steptoe, who was the youngest person at that time to get a book contract. And that award is named for John Steptoe, and Jason was the John Steptoe winner for his very first book. And if there's ever been a writer who has lived up to the promise of new talent, it's Jason Reynolds. So in the last, 10, 12 years have been a tremendous roller coaster ride. And he studied at the University of Maryland, where he earned a degree in English. And before I start to ask questions, I have a couple of Coretta Scott King Awards trivia. Do you know what you have in common with Virginia Hamilton?
No, but I would love to know.
Well, you and Virginia Hamilton are the only two writers to have won the Coretta Scott King recognition 4 years in a row.
What?
Yes. Yes. And
Wow.
Eloise received her Coretta Scott King Award recognition during the very first decade of the awards, and would continue to win recognition right on up through 2012. Yeah. So we are just really, that's why I said this is a very special night. And I wanted to ask both of you, do you remember your earliest connection to poetry?
I would say that my first connection to poetry would be when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And it started with my father taking us to the library. Every 2 weeks, we go to the library and borrow books and return them. And we also were reciting poetry in school. And I loved the way the teachers, some of them, would have us reciting the poems as a group. And our voices would go up and down. We'd say, in the swing, and we'd go up and down. And I think that, well, I know that musical expression of words is with me now and has helped me throughout my career.
I don't. Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. If I were being honest, I think it would probably be the first time hearing something like The Cat in the Hat.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if I don't remember it, like I don't recall that, but if I had to take a gander, it would be like, or Green Eggs and Ham, Sam I Am and all that whole sort of, like the rhyme scheme of it. There's a reason that it worked. There's a reason why kids love Dr. Seuss. So that would be my guess, but my recollection, like the earliest that I can remember sort of making the connection between poetry and myself will probably be, as I always talk about, sort of reading those lyrics, thinking about rap music, right, and thinking about what rap music actually is. I think once I figured that out, or once I sort of engaged with the lyrics on the page at like 9 or 10 years old, reading those liner notes, I think it just did something to me. And it helped me connect sort of what I was looking at on that page, what I remember from a Dr. Seuss, the books in my mother's like house. She had like Cotton Candy on a Rainy Day. In my house, just on the shelves, right? You pull them down, you never read them, but you open them up, you see the words, like, that's interesting. And just drawing all the connections, I think, was probably around my sort of foray into that music.
I actually had to learn to recite in the morning by Paul Laurence Dunbar for 6th grade graduation. And the other day, I started reciting it and got halfway through it without even stopping. Because, you really learned. It became a part of you when you learned it at that age. And I'm sure if you ask kids now, do you like poetry? Many of them would say no, because we teach it in such a way to kill it, when it's that beautiful music that you referred to, that is really what you really want to connect with. What was it like when you began to write yourself?
I didn't begin trying to write professionally until I was in my late 20s. I never even thought of being a writer because I was so shy. I never wanted to do anything that would have me sing on the stage like I'm doing today. And but I love the words, and I had a job as a clerk typist. And after 1 year of that, I was so bored that I wanted to find something else to do. And it came to me that I could try to become a writer. And so I studied books on the craft of writing and practice. I received many rejections, as all the books I studied told me that I would. And so that's why I kept going, because I had already been warned. And now I've forgotten what your question was.
Oh, that was how was it for you?
Yeah.
Did you have an idea of how you would be received, how your work would be received? I don't mean just, that you might get a rejection letter, but did you have an idea how it would, once it got to readers, how it might be received?
That was not even in my thoughts in the beginning. I just wanted to spend the hours of my life doing something that I enjoyed doing, and I wanted to be successful at it. I wanted to get published, but I wasn't thinking so much about the reception until a little later, and I realized that the literature could be strengthening for children. And so my goal became twofold. One was to enjoy doing it myself, and the other was to make a gift to children if I could. And so I could do both. I could enjoy the work myself and not be bored. And I'm never bored. Because I have to rewrite so many times, just rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, and until it's exactly the way I think it should be.
Did you have an idea about how it would be for you when you'd start to write, how it would be received, what the reader's reaction might be?
Not at the beginning. I mean, I don't think I ever. So the journey for me, it was interesting. I think it started after I sort of realized poetry was this thing that I liked. I ended up being thrust into a situation to write it only because I'd lost my grandmother. Mom starts to cry. I don't know what to do. Anyone who's ever experienced that know it's a very strange thing. That first sort of instant of seeing your mother in a space of in sort of a downtrodden, in an emotional space of weakness, right? Or just grief, for that matter. So in an effort to sort of salve her, I wrote a couple lines on the paper, because that's what I had been reading. At 10 years old, I'm reading my lyrics, I'm reading whatever's going on, and so I'm like, well, I'm gonna write down some lines on the paper, and maybe this will work for her. And I gave her this poem, and she printed it on the back of the funeral program without me knowing. And that was sort of the beginning, to watch my family. At the end of it, they come up to you and they say, hey man, that thing you wrote for your grandma was really something, and it made me feel a way. It made me feel a little better. Grandma had 8 siblings, and there was that time in their generation where people started to sort of pass on, that crop was sort of transitioning on. And so every part of my family would say, hey, grandma just passed away, I need you to do the same thing you did for your grandma, my grandma, right? And so
became the family poet.
I became the family poet, and that sort of was the beginning. And I learned very early, because I was the family poet and because I had this incubated space, I learned very early that there was power there. And that became sort of the catalyst for what would then become like spoken word, and after that would become, right, it was a step-by-step transition for me into eventually writing prose.
You talked about loving to read the rap lyrics and connecting. That was the literature for you. But when you began to find or to look for your voice, who were some of the influencers in terms of literary influences?
Well, I'm always, for me, and it's interesting because there's such a vast array of writers, but we only go to like 10, right? And this is going to be those same 10, right? But I say that to say that there are like thousands that we don't talk about that made major shifts in the literary landscape, but that are less celebrated. But for me, Langston was a big deal because his language was so clear. Everything felt so intentional and so clear. Everything was very crisp. He wasn't afraid to use rhyme if he thought it necessary. in a very sophisticated way that didn't feel highfalutin. So he was a big one. I loved Paul Laurence Dunbar. I loved Nikki Giovanni. I loved Maya Angelou. I loved Eloise Greenfield. And it's interesting, right? Because and it's interesting because that's not. Yes, she's sitting next to me, but I worked in a black bookstore, and I probably sold more copies of Honey I Love, and have given away more copies of Honey I Love to my goddaughters and to my little cousins and my nieces and like everybody. It's like a book that I give to my nephew, for that matter. Everybody got that book. It was a book that did something to me and helped me understand like another version of what poetry could be, the power of language, in a very sort of brief and sparse way. How much you can say with a bit of brevity. Lucille Clifton, same thing, right? You only needed, she used 10 lines, 15 lines max to make these really incredible statements. All of these people sort of are part of my literary DNA.
You know, one of the things that, one of those, we were talking about memories that you have over the years, and especially after you retire from a job that you've had for a long time and from a career, when Eloise won the Virginia Hamilton Award for Lifetime Achievement, and we were at a celebration of that, and you came over and kneeled down next to her, and you began to tell about, selling that book and hearing her read. And I thought, what a powerful legacy to know that there were writers that do what they do because of you. And that one of the things that I think manifests itself in the Lifetime Achievement Award was not just your writing, but how much influence you have on other writers.
And I feel it as gratitude to the young people who loved my work and love my work, because when you're writing, you don't know what's going to happen to your work. You're just doing the best that you can, and you don't know how much influence you have or how little influence you have with any particular book. And I have a lot of books, but not all of them have had the same kind of acceptance or influence. But you don't know how it's going to affect people when they read it. I know what I want when I'm writing it. I know that I want the musicality and the meaning of these words to affect somebody, to touch somebody's heart, to touch some memory that they have, and to make them feel wonderful. Because words are so powerful. They're so powerful.
You know, we've heard your works performed by people like Ashley Bryan, and we've seen it illustrated by artists from John Steptoe to Floyd Cooper, Jerry Pinkney, Jan Spivey Gilchrist. How do you find the written imagery that brings that out in illustrators and performers?
Well, what I do mostly is I daydream, and I think, and I've always been a people watcher, so I like to see how people move, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. I put all that together. I put, as I said, the musicality of the language. I put all of it together, and I hope that people will respond. And they respond more to some of my work than to others. And some have not been popular, but enough that I continue to try to do that. And I have a certain kind of confidence that I know what I'm doing because of the studying that I did. And by now, I hope I know. It's been so many years. But I just hope for the best, and I hope that people are moved by what my words say and how they sound.
Jason, I've heard you make statements about the role that poetry can play in reaching, and Jackie told us we can't say reluctant readers anymore, that we have to say, I say would-be readers, because they just haven't found their book yet.
Potential readers.
Yes, potential readers. What do you think poetry can do to reach young people or people who feel that they don't have time to read or whatever, what do you think poetry can do for them to bring them into the literary family?
I think it takes away some of the intimidation. At the end of the day, I think if we were all being honest with ourselves, we could sort of just admit to the fact that if you aren't a reader, a book with 500 words on a page could be a bit much. And that we have these conversations in literature all the time, but if this were any other circumstance, right? If it were like, hey, I'm afraid of heights, we wouldn't say, let's get in an airplane, right? Let's try to get in, let's jump out of a plane immediately, right? What we say is, why don't you climb to the top of the 10th step? And if you can make it to the top of the 10th step, let's be there for a while. And then we'll go to the 12th. And then we'll go to the 16th, right? And if you're scared, we can kind of work, we can stay there, we can hover there, or we can go back down to the 5th, right? That's the way we would normally do it in any circumstance. With reading, it's like, you don't like reading? Here's 15 books, right? And don't worry, they're classics. You'll love these. Right? It's a fascinating thing. And so I think that poetry I think poetry is a way for us to strip down the intimidation, as well as simultaneously teach a sophistication of literature. That's the beauty of it, right? I was talking to R. Greg Christie, who's a brilliant, it almost feels wrong to call him an illustrator. I mean, he's just an artist. He's a brilliant artist who also happens to illustrate children's books, like most of the illustrators in our field, these brilliant artists who happen to also illustrate children's books. And I was talking to him one day, and he said, do you know why it's very important that we use really, really good illustrations in children's books? And I was like, because they're beautiful. And he was like, no. He said the real reason why it's important is because we're also, while engaging with young people and helping them come into the story, we're also developing their palette for art. Right? It's brilliant, right? It's something to think about. The same can be said of poetry. Yes, it's getting them into literacy, it's getting them into language, it's getting them into art, it's getting them into story, and it's sophisticated enough to help them understand how language actually works. It is the piano of literature, is what I always say. If you understand poetry, then the rest of literature is a bit more tangible, a bit more feasible for you.
Another thing that I think that you two have in common is you're unapologetically telling the stories of children that many people don't tell, that many people don't feel are that important. Children in cities, children who may not come from the wealthiest of communities, and but you find the joy in their lives and in the resilience that they exhibit. When I think about some of the books that you've written, I think about Nathaniel Talking. You talk a little bit about why you tell those kinds of stories, or you told those kinds of stories.
My goal is to make children know how much they're loved, how smart they are, how beautiful they are, and their parents and their ancestors from Africa. I want them to be proud of themselves, and I want them to have confidence in themselves, because the world is not always that kind to them and to us who are black. And if we don't love ourselves, we're missing something really beautiful. Really beautiful. We have to know this. And we can't know it unless somebody's telling us to counteract all the negative comments that are being made about us, and that the children need to hear this. I want them to know that they're loved, and that many, many people love them, and they deserve that love. That's what I want them to feel.
Exactly. I mean, look,
Copycat.
Listen, I think I don't think there's anything to be afraid of or to be ashamed of for being a black or brown child in America. I think our stories are valuable. I think who we are as people are valuable, and I think that we're not told it enough. I think we have to. Our job is to make sure that that we know that we're good, right? And not that we're good like we only do good things, but that we belong wherever we are. That's all, right? That we deserve the opportunity to make mistakes. We deserve the opportunity to correct those mistakes. We deserve the opportunity to try. We deserve the opportunity to laugh. These are things that I think I just want kids to read my books and feel cared for, right? And no matter who you are, but I think look, our books are for all children. But I am so proud to be a part of a lineage and a legacy, to be along the line with the great Eloise Greenfield, because we can make books for all children and still be unashamed about the children who are on our minds when we're making those books, which happen to be the kids that look like us and that come from our community. And there's nothing wrong with that, and we shouldn't have to be afraid to even say these things publicly, right? Like it's okay. If anything, it should be celebrated by all of us, by everyone, that these books and these stories are it matters. Nathaniel's rap matters, right? The kids reading Honey, I Love, the pocket edition, and to see all them little black kids with their cornrows and their braids and their afro puffs, it meant something to us. Like, it matters. And it's okay for us to say that. It's okay. Like, people are so afraid, like, remember, keep it as broad as possible. You don't want to alienate anybody. And I'm like, the people who are alienated by this, I don't need. You know?
But it's really interesting because nobody thought it was unusual that all I wanted to read when I was a kid was Beverly Cleary.
Right.
And there was nobody in that story that looked like me, but I loved the humor and the neighborhood and the family.
What story did you
The
say?
Henry Huggins.
Oh.
You know, Beverly Cleary, the
Yeah.
Ramona books. My kids had a Ramona poster on their wall. But, you know, it was fun. It was okay. And I want, you know, kids, all kids, to be able to find themselves in all books. So I think that is really one of the things that, and people would, I remember there was a time when people would say, do you still need the Coretta Scott King Book Awards? You know, do you still need that? You know, it's 50 years.
Yeah.
And we realize we're just starting to see some incremental improvement in the number of books written and illustrated by African Americans. When you first started writing and getting published, what was it like to have so few?
There were very, very few, and I was an adult, so it wasn't as if I were a child looking for something to read. I was an adult, and I was preceded by several adults like John Steptoe, Virginia Hamilton, and others who had books published before I did. Sharon Bell Mathis and George Ford was illustrating them. There were people already doing the work, so it wasn't revolutionary that I thought of doing it. I don't know if I would have or not, but it was very important to me to see that this work is being done, and I'd like to be a part of this. It was part of a mission that I think is very important. And I think too, as I think you said, it doesn't mean they can't read other books, but they have to have books that show them how important they are and let them feel important and know how important they are, and beautiful and wonderful.
When I've heard you speak about, you know, we have a few more writing now and getting published, that I see interactions sometimes on social media between you and Kwame and Nick Stone and other, so it's more of a community now. Do you draw strength from each other as opposed to competing with each other?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always competing with everybody. And no, I'm kidding.
Tell the truth and shame the devil, right?
Listen, I didn't get into this to be mediocre. I'm competing with everybody, including myself, right? It's me competing against me more than any. And when I say competing, it's not. Listen, Jackie knows. Jacqueline Woodson. We should not be colloquial. Jacqueline Woodson knows that whenever she puts out a book, I read the book, taking notes, right? And then I call her and I'm like, hey, I'm just letting you know, stealing all of it, right? All of that, right? Think about, I mean, look, Brown Girl Dreaming comes out, Long Way Down comes out. If you look at Jackie the last 5 years, you'll see me, right? Following along, right? It's just, it's a thing. And so I'm fortunate to be writing at this time. I think there's so many brilliant writers, Nick Stone and Angie Thomas and of course Kwame and Lamar Giles, who is grossly
awesome.
Underrated,
Awesome,
and
right.
everyone should be reading his books. The new one comes out soon, the last day of summer. It is wonderful.
And his YA thrillers.
All
if
the
you have
thrillers, the
teenagers,
mysteries.
They're awesome thrillers. and
Leah
they're just
Marks,
really
hi Leah.
great.
Leah's here. Leah be writing mad books. Put your hand up so that people can see you. You know what I mean? Leah, it's a lot of us, right? And there's so many of us, and we're all working. We're all very different, which I like. Everybody has a different kind of thing, but we're all working under the same umbrella for the same mission. We just love children and want to make sure that they have something to bite down on in terms of storytelling. That's it. Like, there ain't no magic to it. It's a bunch of people working really hard for our collective we, for our children.
Well, that's a great way to segue to give the audience a chance to ask you, ask questions. And we've got a couple of microphones. And I'm going to, if you folks would line up at the microphone if they have questions. And then I'll just kind of try to manage that. And while people are coming forward, are there any writers that you read now? Are there any writers or any styles that you look at now?
I have lost so much of my vision that I'm doing very little reading. And I'm sad about that, but it's just one of the things of life, and life goes on. And so if I were to read one of my books, I couldn't read it the way it's printed. So I have to type everything in huge letters in order to read it. And so it makes things harder, but at the same time, it's just a part of life. And I've had to adjust to it, and sometimes I get frustrated, but I continue to work. And so I'm doing very little reading for pleasure now. I kind of miss that, but I'm very busy writing and thinking, and so I'm enjoying my life.
Well, we're going to take a few questions, and I'd love to have you read something from Thinker, the poet.
Okay.
Okay? Yes.
Hi, Mrs. Greenfield.
Yeah.
You have such a repertoire of titles. Is there any one of them that you would, looking back now, you would like to either redo or add something to it to be more maybe contemporary or a different point of view, since you are now older?
Okay, if I understand your question, is it anything that I have written that I would like to rewrite and make it different? Okay, and the answer is no. When I finish a book, after I have revised it over and over and over, and it gets published or not sometimes, I feel satisfied with it, and I'm moving on to the next thing. I'm not thinking about that.
Hi, I have a question for Mr. Alexander.
Reynolds.
Sorry.
I wish he was here. Go, yes, what's your question?
So were you a runner as a kid to get the ideas for like the Ghost series?
I ran in high school. I wasn't very good, but I did run, and I threw shot put and discus.
So is that like where you got the idea for those series?
That's where I got some of the idea. I mean, the true story is I was, this is being taped? Well, so the true story is I was off. Somebody asked me to write this is interesting, but I have to edit it a little bit. But somebody asked me to write a series about a basketball team, and they said, hey man, there's a new sport, it's called street ball, have you heard of it? And I said, you mean like basketball that I grew up playing my whole life? And they said, oh, is that a thing? And then there was a strange conversation. And they said, well, we want you to write this story. It's like rags to riches, poor kids, and all this, that, and the third. And I was like, anyone who knows me knows, like, no. Like, I'm not going to do that, right? Because you deserve more than that, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. So I said no. But before I said no, I went to my publisher and I said, hey, you know, these other people are trying to offer me this deal to write a 4-book series about a sport. And I don't know, I'm thinking about taking it. I wasn't thinking about taking it. So what I'm giving you right now is a lesson in business, okay? I said, I'm thinking about taking it. And they say, don't take it, because I had already put out all these books. Don't take it. We'll give you a deal, and you can write about any sport you want. And I said, okay, well, if I get to choose a sport, I'll choose track, because track is the only sport that it doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. You can play it because all you need is feet, right?
Sure.
So if you have feet, by the way, I recognize that not all people have feet or can walk, right? So
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge that. But there's a greater chance that we can all play this sport, despite how much money you have or where you live or
Yeah.
what your resources are. And that's why I wrote about it.
Thank you, and I love your writing.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. My man. Hey, if you are a parent, by the way, in this room, whether your young person is having a good time or not, just save your program. Just save your program. All right, 20 years from now, it'll matter.
Yes.
What book do you consider to be a masterpiece and why?
He's talking to you. I'm just getting going. I'm just getting started, man.
Both of you. Because you wrote a book with your mother, with Child Time. Was it was it Child Time? Yes.
I wrote Child Times. The subtitle is a 3-generation memoir, and when I started getting my short stories published in the 1960s, I sent the copies of the magazine Negro Digest to my grandmother, and she had always loved to read, and she began to write about her life, but she kept it a secret. And when she became ill and came to Washington from Norfolk, Virginia to live with my parents, she gave me some of the writing that she had been doing about her life, about her childhood. And I've treasured those. And she said, if you have anything you want to do with these, you can. And I said, okay, I was glad to have it, but I didn't think of anything to do until after she died, probably a year later. I told my mother, I'm writing. My mother had begun to write, and we had my grandmother's material. We should do a 3-generation memoir. So my mother interviewed my grandmother's sisters to fill out her part, and we wrote Child Times. And it's still in print after all these years. It's almost 50 years.
Wow.
It's been in print.
That's amazing.
And the family loves it. It's so exciting to have it. It's a family treasure, and many people love it. So we used my grandmother's sister's material and my grandmother's material for her section, and then my mother wrote her section, and then I wrote my section. So it's in three different sections about our childhoods. It was very, and my father and mother were childhood friends. So he had some memories that he could remind my mother of. And so that it really filled it out and made it really a family project. So it's very precious to us.
I don't know what my masterpiece, man. Like I don't know. I guess if I had to pick one, it'd probably be Boy in the Black Suit.
Thank you.
All right. It would probably be Boy in the Black Suit, but honestly, the in terms of, yeah, that's probably it. Even though there might be the book that comes out in October, that very well could be my masterpiece, honestly. So hold on tight. It could be coming.
Still coming.
It's still coming. Yeah.
Yes.
So we've mostly been talking about poems, and so could you both compare and contrast what you think about poems and normal writing prose, other
Rose.
prose.
We got you.
The long version.
Poems in the straight lines. What? Oh,
What was the
He
question?
wanted to think about maybe compare, contrast a little bit between writing like child time, prose, and writing poetry, some of the poetry.
I'm always going to defer to you.
So you want
No,
to,
well, okay.
yeah.
Um,
Is one easier for you? Was one come more naturally to
What
you?
I don't like to write, which I've done, is biographies. Anything that I have to do research for, and when you're doing the research, there's a lot of misinformation. And when I wrote the picture book biography of Rosa Parks, I was studying a lot of books that people had written about her. And one book said that she was in her 50s when she had that incident on the bus, and she was 42. It said that she had children and she didn't have children. And it's frustrating when you're doing research, but some people love doing research. I don't like doing that. So my favorite writing is poetry and fiction, because I can do some research for information that I need, but mostly it's in my head. And that's what I love. I love that experience of having the words going around and the images of people. And I love thinking about the fact that human beings are not clones. We're all different. We have different personalities, different tastes, different experiences in life. And when you are writing fiction or poetry, you can create all of these images and put them together.
The way I try to describe it, where you go, bro? We in here?
Oh, there he is.
So the way I try to describe it, whenever I'm talking to a young person about the differences that I think, the differences, or at least what it feels like to me. So this is how I want you to imagine it, right? Let's say you're on the top of like a building, right? Like let's say you're on the top of a 20-story building, and you have a pitcher of water, right? And at the bottom on the ground, there's a glass that's like super slim, right? And you take the pitcher of water and you very carefully pour the water, and all the water comes off of the 20-story building and goes right into this slender glass, and all of it goes in, right? That's poetry, right? This idea that you can think about the water as the words, right? And you basically are from this height, you're pouring the water and it's distilling itself. It's whittling down into this very narrow space. And whenever anybody saw you do it, or when everybody experienced it, including yourself when you experienced it, it was like, yo, that is pretty magical, right? It takes such skill, such patience, you have to be exact, right? You have to be very, very careful and thoughtful about how you pour that water to get it all in the glass from so high above, all that water into the slim glass. Writing prose, right? Writing a standard novel is like jumping into a pool, right? A pool of water, right? You jump into the pool and you swim to the bottom of that pool and you just look at the beautiful mosaic tile all in the bottom of the pool, right? So you're exploring the world of the pool, right? You're seeing all the beauty, all of the sort of nuances, how the tile was built, what the tile shows you, the pictures under the water. You can see the bubbles, you can see your breath, you can see the blue, you can smell it. All of those things are around you, right? As you sort of explore life under the water, right? That's what it feels like to make a novel, to write it that way, right? And it's just as magical and it's just as majestic, but it's a completely different experience. Make sense? All right.
Yes.
What is your method of brainstorming to make a book?
Do you have a method?
A method of brainstorming, like getting ideas, brainstorming for the book.
That's a good question, man. Almost too good of a question. Right. Do you have a method?
You go first.
I hope y'all got that on tape.
Look, I don't care.
He's like, my mom told me to come up here and ask a question. All right, my method of brainstorming. Honestly, for me, it usually starts with like an animal or it starts with some strange fact that I learned, right? It's always some really random thing. And then I figure out how to turn that into something, right? Prime example. I was reading about, so I wrote a book called As Brave as You, right? Which actually might be my masterpiece when I really think about it. When I really think about it. But As Brave as You comes from a moment that I was watching National Geographic, and I was learning all this information about birds, right? And what I learned was there's a specific bird called a magpie. And the magpie is one of the only birds, and actually one of the only non-mammals that can recognize its own reflection in the mirror, right? Like if it saw itself in the mirror, it wouldn't run into the mirror because it would say, "That's me." Right? It's one of the only birds that can do that. Most birds slam into the mirror because they think they're attacking another bird, right? So I end up reading all this information, and I go down the rabbit hole. I get all the way in. I'm learning about this bird, right? And it's from that little tidbit of information, I'm like, man, I wonder what I could write to talk about identity, to talk about visibility, to talk about reflection, family, recognizing yourself, recognizing the things around you, consciousness, all these sorts of things. What does it mean to have sight? All these things, and it ended up becoming this book, As Brave as You, when I attached that to my family stories, right? But that's how it works for me. It's something small. Like I'll learn like, oh, is it true that mayflies in the Midwest come out of the ground, they don't have mouths, so they can't eat, and because they can't eat, they can't live. They literally are born to have children, and then they die in 24 hours. And then I say, I wonder what I could do with this information about this insect, and how I could turn this into a 300-page story. And my whole life, my whole brain is full of this random trivia that eventually will make it into a book.
So do you have a brainstorming method?
And I probably would not call it a storm. It's too quiet and calm to brainstorm, but I do have a method of thinking. So I'll use one of my recent books, Partay. And the subtitle is Dance of the Veggies and Their Friends. And the book is about vegetables and other foods that come out of the refrigerator and dance. They have a party. And so I had to just daydream and think about what would the different vegetables be doing? What would they be doing? What would they be thinking? One of the things that I wanted to do was to have, for example, I have a string bean who is doing the pop. Hip hop string bean is her name, and she's doing the pop. So I had to brainstorm, and as I said, it's not a storm, it's subtle and quiet, and she was dancing. I had to see her doing the hip hop dance, and at the end of this poem, she is saying, "Somebody save me," because she can't stop. She can't stop. She can't stop. Somebody save me. And when one of the vegetables comes and drags her away, she's still dancing, even though they're dragging her away. But I have to see it in my head. And so I guess that's as close as I come to brainstorming. It's more subtle. It feels more subtle to me.
Thank you. Next person.
Would you guys ever collaborate to write a book together?
It would be my dream.
She said, would you collaborate?
Oh.
I want to see that.
Me too.
That would be wonderful. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. So I teach at the school across the street, and I teach reading, writing, and social studies. And I find that my students during the writing process, they're kids that love the brainstorming, love the writing, love the editing, some who hate those different processes, and some who love like the author's tea that we have at the end. So I'm wondering for both of you, which part of the writing process is like the peak and which is the pit, if at all, for you?
Okay. What was which part of the writing process
is the peak?
Like the highlight.
The highlight.
And which is the tough?
Or even the entire publishing, the whole process from idea to events like this.
Yeah.
It's all tough. That's all I have to say. It's tough because after I write it, and then I read it the next day, and I said, I don't like this. No, this isn't good. And so I revised and revised and revised throughout the process. So it's hard work, but it's very, very satisfying work. Some people think that when you're writing for children or if the book is humorous, they say, oh, didn't you have fun writing this? No, I didn't. I want the children who read it to have fun, but I didn't have fun. But I love doing it, but it's not fun.
Thank
I
you.
tell everybody, if you like it, somebody really suffered for it. Right? if it feels good to you, it's because usually it's because it felt pretty bad to us.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. But don't tell your students that. Tell your students we love every part of it. You know?
This is a question for Mr. Reynolds. If there was one book
You could choose to like share with the world, which would it be?
One book, period, of all the books.
Yeah.
So I really believe, so to me, I think that one of the best books of our time, right, that I would love to share with the whole world right now is Salvage the Bones. So Jesmyn Ward is this writer out of Mississippi, and I really believe this might be the best book of the 21st century. I just think it's a master. I think it's the closest thing I've read to a perfect book. You may have to give it just a few more years, but when you read it, reach out to me and you're gonna be like, oh man, this book, it really is exquisite. And it's about, just so I give you guys a clue in case you don't know the book, it's about a 15-year-old girl in Mississippi 12 days before Hurricane Katrina hits. And it's about her and her dog and her 3 brothers and her father, and they're trying to figure out, it's like the storm before the storm, and all the things that happen in a family, and it's all the emotions are there, and it's written like, I mean, when you read it, it's like satin, it's like velvet, you know, it's like, you know how you feel when you put a blanket over you on a winter day when it's raining outside, right? It feels like that when you read the book. So that's the one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank
And
you.
the folks at the microphone are going to be our last questions, okay? All right, over here.
This is a question for Mr. Reynolds. First of all, I love your books.
Thank you very much.
How do you come up with the names of your characters in your books? Do you name them after people that you know, or is it just like random?
No, they're all, have you read Ghost?
Yeah.
So the character Aaron, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him. He's sitting right there.
Oh.
That's like his real name and his personality is in the book. You know? That's literally him. So all those people in the books, a lot of those people are real. Those are my friends and my family members, the people that I grew up with. It's kind of unethical to put their names in the book, but you know. So they come from real people. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Johnson Ronald, what inspired you to write for everyone Johnson Ronald?
That's amazing. Thank you for that. That's gonna be my pen name. Yeah.
I gave that to all of the graduates at my church last year.
You gave for everyone, to everybody?
They graduated.
They graduated.
They graduated.
I appreciate it. So what inspired me to write that book? Quitting is the answer. I quit writing when I was 24, which saying it now seems ridiculous. But for those of you who know, I've been in the industry for a long time. I know people think it's a new thing, but I've been in the industry since I was 20 years old. This is going on my 16th year in this industry. Just took a while for anyone to know, right? And when I was 24, things didn't quite work out. The book was out, it didn't sell. I couldn't seem to get another book published. The recession hit, America, bottoms out. Publishing, what people don't know is that publishing industries crumbled because the publishing industry is oftentimes fueled and financed by the newspaper industry. And so when the newspapers suffer, many of the publishers also suffer. And nobody wanted to take a risk on that work. And this is before the diversity push. Nobody wanted to publish what I was making. And so I quit. And when I quit, I started to write this thing to make myself feel better, or at least to tell myself that it was okay, you gave it a good shot. And over the course of 4 years, it changed. because I changed and my life changed and the way that I looked at everything sort of shifted, and it eventually became what everybody now has, which was a pity party turned into like a proclamation over the course of some time, and that's where For Everyone comes from. Cool. A little honesty goes a long way.
And our last question.
How would you define your style of writing?
Oh, this is a good one to end on.
How would you define your style of writing?
That's a hard question. I don't think I would try to define it. I think that it depends on whether this a poem or fiction. I want it to be meaningful, and I want it to go deeply into human beings and what we are like, how different we are one from another, how alike we are in many ways. I want it to be engaging, but I don't know that it is all of these things. This is when I'm writing, this is what I want. I want children to read it and to be drawn into the story or the poem, and to hear the words, to hear the music in the words. And I keep talking about the music because that's one of the things that is so important to me. Has always, music is so important in my life, has always been. But I don't know that I can define it. I don't think I try to define my style. It varies with the story or the poem, and I like to hear other people define it, because if they tell me, then it's always favorable.
That's real.
If it's not favorable, they don't tell me about it. So, but I want to go into the world and write about these people that I'm creating. I want to see them, I want to hear them talk, I want to know what they're thinking, and they're all in my head. And that's the most important thing to me. I don't try to define the style.
I think for me, if I how do I define the style? It's mine. That's all. It's mine, and when you read my books, hopefully, if you read enough of them, hopefully when you open it up, you're like I want there to be a distinct thing. I want you to feel that, right? I want you to be like, man, like, we hear Marvin Gaye, it's like Marvin Gaye got a distinct thing. You hear James Brown got a distinct thing. Tupac, a distinct voice. You ain't have to see his face to know it was him, right? I want that. I want, without it becoming redundant or lazy, but I want people to open a book and be like, we know what we're gonna get. We don't know what we're gonna get story-wise, but we know that whatever his intuition is going to tell him to do, he is going to put on the page. And it's going to be honest. And it's going to be honestly who he is in this particular moment in his life. That's all I ever ask for. That's all I try to do. Approach the page with humility and sheer honesty, naked every day. This is it. This is who I am today. And I'm going to put this on the page however I feel like it, whether you like it or not, right? However I feel like it, in hopes that comes across on the page. Something fresh, Well, but I'm going to start saying I can't define it. I think that's a solid answer. Yeah.
I just want to say this has just really been an incredible opportunity to hear from folks who have managed to touch us and to be a part of our reading and literary experiences for many years and for the future, the current and the future. And we are so fortunate that we could hear them talk about their work, talk about their process, and talk about what motivates them. I want to say thank you to Eloise Greenfield. I am honored to have the opportunity to do that. I want to say thank you to Jason for putting himself out there and carrying the banner and making sure that those stories are being told for all of the young people and getting to understand that we are all in that tapestry. So thank you. Thank you.
I want to thank Deborah for all the work that she has done over the years as a librarian and in making sure that people in libraries get to read good books, and all librarians, how much I appreciate, and all of us appreciate the work that librarians do. And this has been a very special evening to have this conversation, and I enjoyed it very much.
And I think I would be remiss. I think I would be remiss as I'm just super grateful. I appreciate the both of you so much, and you know, 'cause I get to talk to you often. You looked out for me, and I won't tell your business, and I won't. But you looked out for me, and I get to sit here because there are certain things that happen. There are awards that are given, and all sorts of things. And you made sure that I didn't slip through the cracks. You made sure that you didn't let people turn their backs on me and forget about the work that I was trying to do. And I'm always going to be grateful for you allowing space for me at this table. And of course, to Ms. Greenfield, you have influenced me in ways you'll never know. And I told her earlier, when I was 15, I got to see her read at the Martin Luther King Library downtown. I was 15 years old, and I was at an event, and I got to watch her read her work. And so it means the world to me 20 years later to sit next to her and share a stage. It can happen, young people. It can happen. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for coming to this very special evening. If you could just stay in your seats for a minute, we're going to be putting together the